Sometimes life breaks a man down so completely that he'll ride 20 miles just to beg for scraps of work. Sometimes that same broken man finds exactly what his soul has been searching for in the most unexpected place. Young Jesse Lane arrives at the Carter homestead with nothing left but his dignity hanging by a thread. At 23, he's already learned that standing up for what's right can cost you everything. When he knocks on Miss Lillian Carter's schoolhouse door, hat in hand, he's ready to do anything for work. The weathered teacher looks at this desperate young cowboy and asks him a simple question that changes everything. "When's the last time someone believed in you, son?" Those words hit Jesse like a lightning bolt, and the tear that rolls down his face isn't from shamites, from finally being seen by someone who cares. What happens next between this broken cowboy and the wise teacher will restore your faith in human kindness. But what Miss Carter doesn't know about Jesse's past will change both their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered boards of the Carter homestead as Jesse Lane stood frozen in the doorway, his worn hat still clutched in trembling hands. Miss Lillian Carter's question hung in the air like morning mist, and for the first time in months, Jesse felt something crack open inside his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked too long. "I reckon I can't rightly remember, Mom," Jesse finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. He wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, embarrassed by the emotion that had overtaken him. "Been a long while since anyone asked me that." Miss Carter studied him with eyes that had seen plenty of broken souls pass through her door. At 52, she had learned to read the stories written in weathered faces and calloused hands. Jesse's story was one of pride wounded and hope nearly extinguished, but beneath the dust and defeat, she glimpsed something else, goodness that hadn't been entirely beaten out of him. "Well then," she said, stepping back from the doorway, "I suppose we'll have to change that. Come on in, son, coffee's still warm." The schoolhouse was modest but clean, with wooden desks arranged in neat rows and a large blackboard at the front. Sunlight streamed through windows that someone had taken care to keep spotless, casting golden rectangles across the polished floor. Books lined shelves along the walls, more books than Jesse had ever seen in one place. The smell of chalk dust and old paper filled the air, along with something else, the scent of hope, of possibility, of dreams being carefully tended. Miss Carter moved to a small kitchen area at the back of the room, where a pot of coffee sat warming on a wood stove. She poured 2 cups, the steam rising like prayers into the morning air. Jesse remained standing near the door, uncertain whether this kindness was real or just another cruel joke life was playing on him. "Sit down, Jesse," Miss Carter said, gesturing to a chair near her desk. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders." Jesse lowered himself into the chair, his bones aching from too many nights sleeping on hard ground. He accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup as if it might anchor him to this moment of unexpected kindness. "You mentioned you were looking for work," Miss Carter said, settling into her own chair. "What kind of work have you been doing?" "Cattle mostly, ma'am. Been working ranches since I was 16. Jesse's voice grew stronger as he spoke about the one thing he knew he was good at. "I can handle horses, mend fences, work the roundup. I ain't afraid of hard work." "But you're not working cattle now." Jesse's jaw tightened. "No, ma'am. Had a disagreement with my last boss about how he was treating the hands. Turned out he valued loyalty over honesty, and I wasn't willing to keep quiet about men not getting paid what they were owed." Miss Carter leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "So you stood up for what was right, even when it cost you everything?" "Yes, ma'am. And look where it got me, begging for work from a school teacher." There was no bitterness in Jesse's voice, just the quiet resignation of a man who had learned that doing right didn't always lead to reward. "Let me tell you something, Jesse Lane," Miss Carter said, her voice taking on the tone she used when teaching important lessons. A man who stands up for others when he has nothing to gain and everything to lose, that's not a man who should be ashamed. That's a man who should be proud. Jessie looked up at her, surprised by the conviction in her voice. With respect, ma'am, pride doesn't fill an empty belly or put a roof over your head. No, it doesn't, Miss Carter agreed, but it does something far more important. Keeps your soul intact, and a man with his soul intact can rebuild anything else. She stood and walked to a shelf near the window, where a worn leather Bible sat among the other books. Jessie watched as she picked it up, running her fingers over the cracked cover with the reverence of someone handling something precious. This belonged to my father, she said, returning to her seat. He was a circuit preacher who rode these hills for 30 years, bringing hope to places that had forgotten what it looked like. He used to tell me that God doesn't make mistakes. He just plants some seeds in rocky soil to make them stronger. Jessie found himself leaning forward, drawn by the quiet wisdom in her words. What happened to him? He died 5 years ago, right here in this schoolhouse. Had a heart attack while preparing Sunday's sermon. Miss Carter's voice grew soft with memory. Found him slumped over his desk, pen still in his hand. The last thing he wrote was, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Simple words, but he lived them every day of his life. That's why you took over the school? Someone had to. The children in this valley deserve better than ignorance and poverty. Education is the one thing that can lift them out of the dust and give them a chance at something better. She paused, studying Jessie's face. But teaching children isn't just about books and arithmetic. It's about showing them that someone believes in them, that they're worth investing in. Jessie felt something stir in his chestnut, the bitter ache of disappointment he'd grown used to, but something warmer, more hopeful. What kind of work did you have in mind, ma'am? Well, this old place needs plenty of fixing. The roof leaks in 3 places, the front steps are rotting, and I could use help with the heavier chores. I can't pay much, just room and board and a few dollars when I can manage it, but it's honest work, and it's yours if you want it. I'll take it, Jessie said without hesitation. When do I start? How about right now? Miss Carter smiled. There's a small room behind the kitchen you can use. It's not much, but it's clean and dry. You can put your things there, and then I'll show you what needs doing. Jessie stood, feeling steadier than he had in months. Miss Carter, I want you to know I'm grateful, more grateful than I can say. Don't thank me yet, she said with a gentle laugh. Wait until you see how much work needs doing around here. You might change your mind about my generosity. As Jessie gathered his few possessions from his horse and settled into the small room that would be his home, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of belonging somewhere. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a small table, and a window that looked out over the valley. It wasn't much, but it was his, and that made all the difference. That first afternoon, Miss Carter showed him around the property, pointing out the various projects that needed attention. The schoolhouse itself was solid but showing its age, with loose boards and chipped paint. Behind it stood a small barn where she kept her horse and a handful of chickens. A vegetable garden struggled against the harsh soil, and a well with a temperamental pump provided water for the property. The children will be back from summer break in 2 weeks, Miss Carter explained as they walked. 23 of them, ages 6 to 16. Some bright as new pennies, others struggling just to put letters together, all of them precious beyond measure. Jessie found himself nodding, understanding without words why this work mattered to her. He'd never thought much about teaching before, but there was something appealing about the idea of helping young minds grow, of being part of something that built people up instead of tearing them down. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jessie stood on the front porch of the schoolhouse, hammer in hand, fixing the loose boards on the steps. Miss Carter emerged from inside, carrying 2 glasses of cold water from the well. You've made good progress today, she said, handing him a glass. Those steps haven't been this solid in years. It feels good to be useful again, Jessie admitted, accepting the water gratefully. I'd forgotten what it was like to work on something that mattered. Everything matters, Jessie. Every nail you drive, Every board you fix, every kindness you show it, all matters. The trick is remembering that when times get hard. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. In the distance, coyotes began their evening song, and somewhere in the valley, a church bell chimed the hour. Jesse felt a peace he hadn't known in months, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd found his way to exactly where he was supposed to be. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "that question you asked me earlier about, when someone last believed in me, I've been thinking about it. And I think maybe it was today. I think maybe it was you." Miss Carter smiled, and in that smile, Jesse saw something that would sustain him through whatever challenges lay ahead, the unwavering belief that even broken men could find their way back to wholeness, given time, patience, and someone willing to see the good that remained hidden beneath the dust and disappointment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons to learn, and new reasons to hope. But tonight, for the first time in months, Jesse Lane would sleep with a roof over his head and the knowledge that someone believed in him, and that, he realized, made all the difference in the world. Jesse had been working at the Carter homestead for 8 days when the letter arrived. 8 days of honest work, hot meals, and the gradual rebuilding of something he'd thought was permanently broken inside him. He'd found a rhythm in the simple tasks: mending fences, fixing the schoolhouse roof, helping Miss Carter prepare for the children's return. For the first time in months, he'd begun to believe that maybe he could build something good from the ruins of his old life. The letter came with the weekly mail delivery, brought by old Tom Brennan on his monthly circuit through the valley. Jesse was up on the schoolhouse roof, replacing damaged shingles, when he heard the familiar jingle of Tom's horse's bridle. He looked down to see Miss Carter emerge from the schoolhouse, wiping her hands on her apron as she went to greet the mailman. "Morning, Miss Carter," Tom called out, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose joints had endured too many hard winters. "Got a few letters for you today, and one for that young fella you've got working for you." Jesse's hammer froze mid-swing. A letter for him? Nobody knew where he was. He'd left his last job without word to anyone, riding into the wilderness with nothing but his horse and his wounded pride. Who could possibly be writing to him? "Jesse," Miss Carter called up to him. "You've got mail." Jesse climbed down from the roof, his hands suddenly unsteady as he took the envelope from Miss Carter. The return address made his stomach clench. E. Lane, Millbrook Township, Kansas. His brother Elias. Jesse hadn't spoken to his family in over 2 years, not since the night he'd left home in anger and shame. "Everything all right, son?" Miss Carter asked, noticing the way Jesse's face had gone pale. "I don't know," Jesse said honestly. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to read this." He walked behind the schoolhouse, seeking privacy, and with trembling fingers, opened the letter. The paper was cheap, and the handwriting hurried, as if his brother had been anxious to get the words down before he lost his nerve. "Jesse," the letter began, "I pray this finds you alive and well. I've been searching for you for months, writing to every town and ranch I could think of. Finally heard from Jake Morrison that you might be in the Tumbleweed Junction area. If you're reading this, I found you. I know you're probably angry at me for tracking you down, but I couldn't let things stand as they were. There's something you need to know. Something that changes everything about what happened that night you left. Pa's dying, Jesse. Doc says he's got maybe a month, maybe less. The consumption's got him bad, and he's been asking for you every day. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because I found out the truth about what happened with Sarah. She came to me 3 weeks ago, crying and carrying on something awful. Told me she couldn't live with the lie anymore. Jesse, she was never carrying your baby. She made the whole thing up because she was scared her pa would find out she'd been with that traveling salesman who came through town. She picked you because she knew you were decent enough to do right by her, even if it meant giving up your dreams. When you refused to marry her and left town instead, she let everyone believe you'd abandoned her. Let Pa believe you'd dishonored our family name. She married Tom Wheeler 2 weeks after you left, and now she's got a baby that looks nothing like you but everything like that salesman. I should have stood up for you that night, should have questioned her story instead of letting Pa tear into you like he did. I was a coward, Jesse, and I've regretted it every day since. Pa knows the truth now. Found out when the baby was born and didn't look nothing like any Lane ever born. He's been eating himself up with guilt, knowing he drove away his own son over a lie. He wants to make things right before he dies, but he's too proud to write to you himself. I know you got no reason to forgive any of us, but I'm asking you to come home. Not for me, not even for Pa, but for yourself. You left here believing you were less than you are, and that's not right. You deserve to know the truth, and Pa deserves the chance to apologize to your face. If you can't come, I understand. But know that you were right to leave the way you did. You were right to stand up for yourself, and you were right to refuse to marry a woman who was lying to you. I'm proud of you for that, even if I was too stupid to see it at the time. Your brother, Elias. P.S. I've enclosed money for travel if you need it. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Jesse read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking more with each reading. 2 years. 2 years of believing he'd been a fool and a coward. 2 years of carrying the shame of thinking he'd run away from his responsibilities. 2 years of believing his own father saw him as a disgrace to the family name. He sank to his knees in the dirt behind the schoolhouse. The letter crumpled in his fist. The weight of it was crushing, not just the revelation of Sarah's lie, but the knowledge that his exile had been based on deception. All those nights sleeping rough, all those jobs where he'd had to prove himself over and over, all those times he'd wondered if he really was the worthless coward his father had called him. Miss Carter found him there 20 minutes later, still kneeling in the dirt, tears streaming down his face. She didn't say anything at first, just knelt beside him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jesse," she said softly, "what is it?" He handed her the letter without words. She read it slowly, her expression growing more troubled with each line. When she finished, she folded it carefully and handed it back to him. "Oh, Jesse," she said, her voice full of sorrow. "I'm so sorry." "I don't know what to do," Jesse said, his voice broken. "I don't know how to all this time. I thought I was running from the truth, but I was running from a lie. And now you have to decide what to do with the real truth." Jesse looked at her, his eyes red with tears. "I left home thinking I was a coward, spent 2 years believing I wasn't good enough for anyone or anything. And now I find out." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Now you find out you were brave," Miss Carter said firmly. "You were brave enough to refuse to be manipulated, brave enough to stand up for yourself when no one else would, brave enough to walk away from a lie, even when it cost you everything. But my father, your father was deceived, just like you were. The question now is whether you're brave enough to go back and face him, knowing what you know." Jesse stood slowly, his legs unsteady. I can't face him. What if he dies before I can? What if I get there and he's... What if you don't go and spend the rest of your life wondering?" Miss Carter countered gently. "Jesse, you have a chance to heal something that's been broken for 2 years. Not just for your father, but for yourself." Jesse looked at the letter again, then at Miss Carter. "But what about here? What about the work, the school? I can't just leave you." "This isn't about me, Jesse. This is about you finishing something that should have been finished a long time ago. The work will wait, the school will wait. But your father won't wait forever, and neither will your chance to make peace with your past." Jesse felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Part of him wanted to tear up the letter and pretend he'd never received it. The life he was building here with Miss Carter was good, clean, honest. Going back to Kansas meant facing everything he'd run from, including the possibility that his father might die before they could reconcile. But another part of him, the part that had been wounded and angry for 2 years, knew that Miss Carter was right. He couldn't build a real future on the foundation of a lie. He couldn't truly move forward until he'd faced his past and set things right. "I have to go," he said finally. "Yes," Miss Carter said, "you do. But what if when I come back, you don't need me anymore? What if you find someone else to help with the school?" Miss Carter smiled through her own tears. "Jesse Lane, I told you once that I believed in you. That doesn't change just because you have to go away for a while. When you come back, and you will come back, I'll be here. The school will be here. Your life will be here waiting for you." Jessie looked at her, memorizing her face, the way the afternoon light caught the silver in her hair, the strength in her eyes. "You really believe I'll come back?" "I believe you'll do what's right," she said. "You always do, even when it costs you. That's who you are, Jessie. That's who you've always been." As Jessie went inside to pack his few belongings, he felt something shifting inside him. The shame and anger that had driven him for 2 years were beginning to transform into something else, not quite forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. He was going home, not as the broken man who had fled in the night, but as someone who had learned his own worth. The road ahead would be difficult, full of painful conversations and hard truths. But for the first time in 2 years, Jesse Lane felt ready to face whatever waited for him back in Kansas. He had Miss Carter's faith to sustain him, and the knowledge that he had a home to return to when the healing was done. Jesse left for Kansas the next morning, but not before spending his last evening at the schoolhouse, creating something that would remain as a testament to the hope he'd found there. While Miss Carter prepared lessons for the children's return, Jesse worked by lamplight in the small workshop behind the barn. His hands moving with careful precision over a piece of oak wood he'd salvaged from an old fence post. The desk took shape slowly under his patient craftsmanship. He'd learned woodworking from his grandfather years ago, before the troubles started, before Sarah's lies had torn his family apart. The familiar motions of measuring, cutting, and sanding brought back memories of happier times afternoons spent in his grandfather's workshop, learning that a man could create beauty with his hands if he had the patience and the heart for it. "Working late again?" Miss Carter's voice came from the doorway, warm and tinged with fondness. Jesse looked up from his work, wood shavings in his hair and satisfaction in his eyes. "Wanted to finish this before I left. It's for the school for one of the children." Miss Carter stepped closer, admiring the small desk taking shape under Jesse's skilled hands. It was sized for a child, with a slanted top that would open to reveal storage underneath. The wood was rough oak, but Jesse had sanded it smooth and was now carefully carving small designs along the edges, not fancy, but thoughtful. "It's beautiful, Jesse. Which child is it for?" "Well, I was thinking about what you said about the children coming back in a few days. You mentioned some of them struggle more than others." Jesse paused in his carving, his expression thoughtful. "I figured maybe if one of them had something special, something made just for them, it might help them feel like they belong." "That's very thoughtful of you." Jesse shrugged, but Miss Carter could see the pleasure her words brought him. "I've been thinking about what you said about belief, about how someone believing in you can change everything. I thought maybe having a desk made just for them might help some child feel that way." Miss Carter watched him work, noting the care he put into every detail. The desk wasn't just functional, it was a work of love, crafted by someone who understood what it meant to need something special to call your own. "Jesse," she said softly, "you're going to make a wonderful father someday." Jesse's hands stilled on the wood. "I don't know about that, Mum. After what happened with Sarah, I'm not sure I'm cut out for that kind of responsibility." "Sarah's lies don't define you, Jesse. They never did. You're the kind of man who works late into the night making a desk for a child he's never met, just because he wants them to feel special. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of father you'd be." Jesse resumed his carving, but Miss Carter could see the thoughtfulness in his movements. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed and married her. If I'd been willing to live with the lie. You'd have been miserable," Miss Carter said without hesitation. "And so would she. A marriage built on deception is no marriage at all. You did the right thing, even if it was the hard thing. My father didn't see it that way. Your father was hurting and confused. He thought he was protecting the family honor, but he was really just lashing out at the wrong person. When you see him again, he'll understand that." Jesse set down his carving tool and looked at her. "What if he doesn't? What if he still believes I'm a coward? Then you'll show him who you really are. You'll show him this desk, and you'll tell him about how you've been helping prepare a school for children who need someone to believe in them." You'll show him that the son he raised is still the good man he wanted him to be. Jesse picked up a piece of sandpaper and began smoothing the desktop, his movements rhythmic and meditative. "Miss Carter, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you take me in? Really? You could have sent me away like anyone else would have." Miss Carter was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Do you remember what I told you about my father? How he used to say that God plants some seeds in rocky soil to make them stronger?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well, when I looked at you that first morning, I saw a seed that had been planted in rocky soil, all beaten down and discouraged, but still trying to grow. My father taught me that it's not enough to just recognize potential, you have to nurture it, water it, give it light. That's what teachers do, Jesse. We don't just teach reading and arithmetic. We teach people to believe in themselves." Jesse continued working, but she could see her words had affected him. "I'm grateful for that, more grateful than I can say." "Then show me by going to Kansas and making peace with your family. Show me by coming back here ready to build the life you were meant to have." Jesse looked up from his work, his eyes meeting hers. "You really believe I'll come back?" "I know you will, because this is where you belong now. This is where you can do the most good." Miss Carter smiled. "Besides, I've got big plans for you when you return. The children will need someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who can show them that difficulties don't define you, how you respond to them does." Jesse felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. The idea of helping teach children, of being part of something that built people up instead of tearing them down, appealed to him more than he'd expected. "I don't know anything about teaching, Mum. You know about kindness. You know about perseverance. You know about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you. Those are the most important lessons anyone can teach." Jesse finished sanding the desktop and ran his hand over the smooth surface. The wood gleamed in the lamplight, ready for the child who would someday sit here and learn their letters, practice their numbers, dream their dreams. "I'll put the hinges on tomorrow morning before I leave," he said. "Then it'll be ready for whoever needs it most." "I already know exactly which child it's for," Miss Carter said with a smile. "Little Emma Patterson. She's 7 years old, and she comes to school every day with her dress patched and her shoes worn thin. But she's got the biggest heart and the brightest curiosity you ever saw. She struggles with her letters, but she never gives up. She's going to love having a desk that's special just for her." Jessie smiled, imagining the little girl's face when she saw her new desk. "Then I'm glad I made it. Everyone deserves to feel special." "Yes, they do," Miss Carter agreed, "including you, Jessie. Don't forget that when you're in Kansas facing your past, you're not going back as the broken man who left. You're going back as someone who's learned his own worth." As Jesse put away his tools and prepared to head back to his small room, he felt a sense of completion that went beyond the desk he'd just finished. He was leaving something behind, a piece of himself that would remain at the schoolhouse even while he was gone. But more importantly, he was taking something with him, the knowledge that he was capable of creating beauty, of giving joy to others, of being the kind of man who thought about a little girl's needs and worked late into the night to meet them. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air despite the summer heat. Jesse loaded his few belongings onto his horse and secured the completed desk in the back of Miss Carter's wagon. She would deliver it to the schoolhouse later that day. As he prepared to mount his horse for the long ride to Kansas, Miss Carter appeared with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Food for the journey?" she explained, tucking it into his saddlebags. "And this." She handed him a small leather-bound book. "It's not much, but it might help pass the time on the road." Jesse looked at the book, a collection of poems by Walt Whitman. "Thank you, Miss Carter, for everything. Just remember what we talked about, Jesse. You're not going back as the same man who left. You're going back stronger, wiser, and with people who believe in you." Jesse mounted his horse and looked down at her, memorizing her face one more time. "When I come back." "When you come back," she interrupted with a smile, "we'll have a school full of children who need to learn that someone believes in them too." As Jesse rode away from the Carter homestead, he carried with him not just the letter from his brother, but the knowledge that he had found something precious in this remote corner of the world, a purpose, a belonging, and a woman whose faith in him had helped him remember who he really was. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in 2 years, Jesse Lane was riding toward his past with his head held high. The ride to Kansas took Jesse 4 days, 4 days of solitude on dusty roads that gave him plenty of time to think about what he would say when he finally faced his father. He practiced conversations in his mind, imagining scenarios that ranged from tearful reconciliation to bitter rejection. But when he finally rode into the familiar streets of Millbrook Township on a Thursday afternoon, all his rehearsed words fled his mind. The town looked smaller than he remembered, more weathered. The general store still stood on Main Street, but the paint was peeling and one of the front windows was cracked. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house had a "for sale" sign in the front yard, and the church steeple that had once gleamed white was now a dingy grey. 2 years away had changed his perspective on many things, but seeing his hometown through older eyes was perhaps the most jarring change of all. Jesse found his brother Elias at the blacksmith shop where he'd worked since they were boys. Elias looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping, and the hammer nearly slipped from his hands when he saw Jesse standing in the doorway. "Jesse," Elias breathed, setting down his tools. "You came." "Got your letter," Jesse said simply. "How is he?" Elias wiped his hands on his leather apron, his expression grave. "Not good. Doc says maybe a week, maybe 2 if we're lucky. The consumption's got him bad, Jesse. He can barely get out of bed most days." Jesse nodded, steeling himself for what he would find at home. "Does he know I'm coming?" "I didn't tell him. Wasn't sure you'd come, and I didn't want to get his hopes up just to have them crushed again." Elias paused, studying his brother's face. "You look different, Jesse. Older, maybe. More settled. I found work with a schoolteacher out in Colorado Territory. Good work, honest work. She's been teaching me things I never knew I needed to learn." Elias smiled at that. "Always said you had more brains than the rest of us combined. Just took someone smart enough to see it." His expression grew serious again. "Jesse, about what happened before you left, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. Should have questioned Sarah's story instead of just going along with Pa's anger. You were protecting the family. I understand that now. No, I was being a coward. There's a difference." Elias removed his apron and hung it on a peg. "Come on, let's go home." The Lane family farm sat on the outskirts of town, a modest spread with a white farmhouse that had seen better days. Jesse's mother emerged from the kitchen as they approached, and the sight of her son brought tears to her eyes. "Jesse," she whispered, crossing the yard to embrace him. "My boy, you've come home." "Hello, Ma," Jesse said, hugging her tight. She felt smaller in his arms, more fragile than he remembered. "How are you holding up?" "Better now that you're here. He's been asking for you every day, Jesse. Every single day since we found out the truth about Sarah." Jesse's jaw tightened at the mention of Sarah's name, but the anger that had once consumed him was different now, tempered by time and understanding. "Where is he?" "In the bedroom. He sleeps most of the day now, but he's awake. Go on in, son. He needs to see you." Jesse climbed the familiar stairs to his parents' bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. He paused at the doorway, taking in the sight of his father propped up in bed, looking decades older than his 58 years. The consumption had hollowed out his cheeks and dimmed his eyes, but when he saw Jesse standing in the doorway, something flickered to life in his expression. "Jesse," his father whispered, "you came back." "Hello, Pa." Jesse entered the room slowly, unsure of his reception despite Elias's letter. "I got word you wanted to see me." His father struggled to sit up straighter, and Jesse moved instinctively to help him, propping pillows behind his back. The simple act of kindness seemed to break something in the older man's composure. "Son, I owe you an apology, a big one. I was wrong about everything, wrong about you, wrong about what happened, wrong to let you leave thinking you'd dishonored this family." Jesse pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Elias told me about Sarah, about what really happened. That girl came to me 3 weeks ago, crying and carrying on, telling me the truth about that baby. Said she couldn't live with the lie anymore." His father's voice was weak, but filled with regret. "All this time, I thought you'd run away from your responsibilities. Turns out you were the only one with enough sense to see through her deception." "Pa, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," his father interrupted with surprising firmness. "I need to say this while I still can. You were right to refuse her, Jesse. Right to stand up for yourself when everyone else was ready to believe the worst. I should have known better. Should have known the boy I raised wouldn't abandon a woman carrying his child." Jesse felt the weight of 2 years' worth of anger and hurt beginning to shift in his chest. "I wanted to tell you the truth, but nobody would listen. I was listening to my pride instead of my heart. Thought I had to protect the family name, but I ended up driving away the best thing about this family." His father reached out with a trembling hand, and Jesse took it without hesitation. "Can you forgive a foolish old man, son?" Jesse squeezed his father's hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath the papery skin. "There's nothing to forgive, Pa. We were all doing what we thought was right." "You were doing what was right. The rest of us were just being stubborn and proud." His father's eyes filled with tears. "Tell me about where you've been, son." "Elias said you found work somewhere out west." Jesse found himself talking about Miss Carter and the schoolhouse, about the work he'd been doing and the sense of purpose he'd discovered. His father listened intently, asking questions and nodding approvingly as Jesse described his life in Colorado. "She sounds like a special woman, this teacher of yours," his father said when Jesse had finished. "She is. She saw something in me when I couldn't see it myself. Gave me a chance when nobody else would. Sounds like she's got good judgment. When are you going back to her?" Jesse was surprised by the question. "I don't know. I thought maybe I should stay here, help Ma take care of things after." "No," his father said firmly. "Your life is out there now, with that teacher and that school. Don't make the mistake I made, putting duty before happiness. You go back to her, Jesse. You go back and build the life you were meant to have." Over the next several days, Jesse spent long hours at his father's bedside, sharing stories and memories, healing wounds that had festered for 2 years. His mother fussed over him, cooking his favorite meals and mending clothes he'd outgrown the need for. Elias included him in conversations about the farm's future, and gradually, Jesse began to understand that his exile was truly over. On his 5th day home, Jesse sat by his father's bed, reading aloud from the book of poems Miss Carter had given him. His father had grown fond of Whitman's words, particularly the ones about the strength found in adversity and the beauty of simple, honest work. "That teacher of yours has good taste in books," his father said with a weak smile. "You make sure you thank her for me when you see her again." "I will, Pa. And Jesse, when you do go back to Herond, you will go back. You tell her she's got my blessing. A woman who can see the good in a broken-down cowboy and help him remember his worth is the kind of woman a man should hold on to." Jesse smiled, thinking of Miss Carter and the schoolhouse and the life waiting for him there. "I'll tell her, Pa. I'll tell her everything." Jesse's father passed away peacefully on a Sunday morning, slipping away in his sleep while the church bells rang across the valley. Jesse held his mother's hand as they stood beside the bed, feeling a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. The man who had died was not the angry, disappointed father who had driven him away 2 years ago, but the loving man who had raised him, the one who had spent his final days making sure his son knew he was loved and valued. The funeral was well attended, with neighbors and friends coming to pay their respects to a man who had worked hard and raised his family with integrity. Jesse stood beside his mother and brother, accepting condolences and handshakes from people who remembered him as a boy. More than one person mentioned how proud his father had been in those final days, telling anyone who would listen about his son's work with the schoolteacher out west. After the service, as friends and neighbors gathered at the farmhouse for the traditional meal, Jesse found himself face to face with Sarah Wheeler, formerly Sarah Mitchell, the woman whose lies had torn his family apart. She approached him hesitantly, her husband, Tom, standing protectively nearby, their young son playing at her feet. "Jesse," she said softly, her eyes red with tears, "I'm so sorry about your father. He was a good man." Jessie studied her face, seeing the weight of guilt and shame she'd been carrying. The anger he'd once felt toward her had dimmed to something closer to pity. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you coming." "Jessie, I need to say something to you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am for what I did, for the lies I told, for the pain I caused your family." "I know you are," Jessie said simply. "My brother told me you came forward with the truth. That took courage." "It took too long," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared and young and stupid, and I made choices that hurt good people. I've regretted it every day since." Jessie looked at her husband Tom, a decent man who'd married a woman carrying another man's child and raised that boy as his own. "Looks like things worked out for you in the end. Tom's been good to me, better than I deserved. But I need you to know that I never meant for it to go as far as it did. When you refused to marry me, I should have told the truth then, instead of letting everyone believe you'd abandoned me. We all make mistakes, Sarah. What matters is that you finally did the right thing." Jessie paused, watching her young son chase a butterfly across the yard. "Your boy's lucky to have Tom as a father." "He is, and Tom's lucky to have a son who needs him." Sarah wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "I heard you're doing well out west, teaching children." "Helping to teach them, yes, it's good work." "I'm glad. You always were too good for this place, Jessie. Too good for all of us." Jessie shook his head. "No, Sarah. I just needed to find where I belonged. We all do." As the afternoon wore on and the last of the visitors departed, Jessie sat on the front porch with his mother and brother, watching the sun set over the fields his father had worked for 30 years. "What will you do now, Ma?" Jessie asked. "Elias has asked me to come live with him and Mary. They've got room, and Mary could use help with the baby coming." His mother smiled. "It'll be good to have family close again." "And the farm?" "We'll sell it," Elias said. "Use the money to buy a bigger place closer to town. Start fresh." He looked at Jessie. "You could come back, you know. Help us build something new." Jessie considered it for a moment, thinking about the familiar rhythms of farm life, the comfort of family, the ease of staying in a place where everyone knew his story. But when he tried to imagine himself here permanently, the image wouldn't form. His heart was elsewhere now, in a small schoolhouse where a wise woman waited for his return. "I appreciate the offer, Eli, but my life's out west now, with Miss Carter in the school." "You love her," his mother said. It wasn't a question. Jessie felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Ma! Don't be embarrassed, son. It's written all over your face when you talk about her. The question is, does she love you back?" Jessie thought about Miss Carter's steady faith in him, her quiet strength, the way she'd looked at him the morning he left, as if she were memorizing his face, as if his return mattered to her as much as it did to him. "I think she might," he said quietly, "but she's older than me, more educated. She's got her life figured out, and I'm still trying to find my way. Love doesn't care about age or education," his mother said firmly. "It cares about character, and you've got plenty of that. If she's half as wise as you say she is, she'll see what a good man you've become." That evening, Jessie sat in his childhood bedroom, packing his few belongings for the journey back to Colorado. He'd found something here in Kansas closure, forgiveness, the restoration of family bonds, but he'd also confirmed what he'd known in his heart since the day he left. His future lay elsewhere. He picked up the small silver locket that had belonged to his grandmother, the one his mother had pressed into his hands earlier that evening. "For when you're ready to ask her to marry you," she'd said with a knowing smile. "Your grandmother would have liked her, I think. Would have appreciated a woman who sees the good in people." Jessie held the locket up to the lamplight, watching it catch and reflect the flame. It was a simple piece, not particularly valuable, but it carried the weight of family history and love passed down through generations. Someday, if he was lucky, he might slip it around Miss Carter's neck and ask her to build a life with him. But first, he had to get back to her, had to return to the schoolhouse and the children who would soon fill it with laughter and learning, had to prove to himself and to her that he was the man she believed him to be. The next morning, Jessie said goodbye to his family at the train station. The railroad had finally come to Millbrook Township, cutting his travel time from 4 days to less than 2. As the train pulled away from the platform, Jesse watched his mother and brother grow smaller in the distance, feeling grateful for the healing that had taken place, but eager for the life that awaited him. He pulled out the book of poems Miss Carter had given him and found his favorite passage, the one about the strength that comes from weathering life's storms. He thought about the storms he'd weathered: Sarah's betrayal, his father's rejection, 2 years of wandering and self-doubt, and realized that each trial had shaped him into the man he was becoming. The train carried him west toward Colorado, toward the schoolhouse, toward Miss Carter, and the future they might build together. Jesse Lane was no longer running from his past. He was racing toward his destiny, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. Jesse returned to Tumbleweed Junction on a crisp September morning to find the schoolhouse transformed. Children's voices carried on the autumn air, and through the windows he could see Miss Carter at the blackboard, her students arranged in neat rows before her. The sight filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. He waited outside until the school day ended, not wanting to interrupt the lesson. When the children finally burst through the doors in a cascade of energy and chatter, several of them stopped to stare at the unfamiliar man leaning against the fence post. "Are you the cowboy Miss Carter told us about?" asked a freckled boy of about 10. "The one who made Emma's desk?" Jesse smiled. "I suppose I am. Is Emma here?" A small girl with braided hair and patched dress stepped forward shyly. "I'm Emma, sir. Miss Carter said you made my desk special, just for me." "I did indeed. Do you like it?" Emma's face lit up like sunrise. "It's the most beautiful thing I ever owned. Miss Carter lets me keep my very own pencil and paper in it, and I drew you a picture to say thank you." She handed him a carefully folded piece of paper. Jesse opened it to reveal a child's drawing of a man in a cowboy hat standing next to a small desk with "Thank you" written in shaky letters across the top. "This is wonderful, Emma. I'll treasure it always." Miss Carter appeared in the doorway, having finished cleaning the blackboard. When she saw Jesse standing among the children, her face broke into a smile that made his heart skip. "Mr. Lane," she said formally, though her eyes sparkled with joy. "Welcome back." "Miss Carter," he replied, removing his hat. "Good to be back." The children scattered toward their homes, leaving Jesse and Miss Carter alone in the schoolyard. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, taking in the changes that time and distance had wrought. "You look well," Miss Carter said finally. "How did things go in Kansas?" "Better than I hoped. Made peace with my family before Pa died. Found out I wasn't the man I thought. I westerns out I was better." Jesse stepped closer. "How have things been here?" "Busy. 23 students this year, just as I expected. They're good children, but some of them are struggling. I could use help with the older boys. They need a man's influence." Jesse nodded, understanding. "I'd be honored to help, if you'll have me." "Of course I'll have you. This is your home now, Jesse. It always was." They walked together toward the schoolhouse, and Jesse noticed the subtle changes Miss Carter had made in his absence. New books lined the shelves, the windows had been cleaned until they sparkled, and fresh flowers sat on her desk. But it was the same place that had offered him hope when he'd needed it most. "I brought you something," Jesse said, pulling out a small wrapped package. "From my mother. She wanted to thank you for taking care of me." Miss Carter unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate handkerchief embroidered with tiny wildflowers. "It's beautiful. Please thank her for me." "I'm afraid I can't do that. She died the day after Pa did, peacefully, in her sleep." The doctor said her heart just gave out. Jesse's voice was steady, but Miss Carter could see the grief in his eyes. "Oh, Jesse, I'm so sorry. She was ready to go, said she didn't want to be a burden to anyone, and she'd made her peace with losing Pa. She was happy in those last days, knowing the family was whole again." Miss Carter touched his arm gently. "I'm glad you were able to be with them. I know it meant everything to have you there." Jesse looked around the schoolhouse, taking in the familiar sight of small desks and learning materials. "I realized something while I was gone. This place being here with you, helping these children, it's not just work for me. It's who I'm meant to be. I hoped you'd feel that way. Miss Carter moved to her desk and picked up a folded piece of paper. I've been working on some lesson plans that would benefit from a man's perspective. Teaching the boys about responsibility, integrity, standing up for what's right. The kinds of lessons you could teach better than I ever could. Jessie took the paper, scanning the carefully written notes. You want me to actually teach? I want you to be my partner in this, Jessie. These children need both of us. They need to see what it looks like when a man and woman work together with respect and purpose. Miss Carter paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. If that's something you'd be interested in. The implications of her words hung in the air between them. Jessie looked into her eyes and saw something that made his pulse quicken, not just professional partnership, but something deeper, more personal. Miss Carter, Lillian, I need to tell you something. While I was in Kansas, I did a lot of thinking about what I want from life, about what matters to me. And what did you decide? Jessie set down the lesson plans and moved closer to her. I decided that I want to build something meaningful with someone I respect, someone who sees the best in people and helps them become it. Someone who's taught me that love isn't just about need, it's about choosing to grow together, to face whatever comes as a team. Miss Carter's breath caught. Jessie, I know I'm younger than you. I know I'm not educated like you are. But I love you, Lillian. I love your wisdom and your kindness, and the way you make everyone around you believe they can be better than they are. I love the life we could build together, here at this school, with these children. Miss Carter reached up and touched his face gently. Oh, Jessie, I've been hoping you'd say that since the day you left. You have? I've loved you since that first morning when you cried at my question about believing in you. I saw your heart then, saw the good man you were underneath all that hurt and anger. I just had to wait for you to see it too. Jessie pulled her closer, his heart racing. I want to marry you, Lillian. I want to be your husband and your partner and the father of children who'll grow up knowing they're loved and valued. Yes, she whispered. Yes, to all of it. Jessie was about to kiss her when a sharp knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted them. They sprang apart, both flushed and breathing hard. Miss Carter smoothed her skirts and went to answer the door. A grizzled man in dusty clothes stood on the threshold, his face hard and unfriendly. Jessie recognized him immediately. Buck Morrison, the foreman from his last job, the man whose corruption Jessie had exposed. Well, well, Morrison said, pushing his way into the schoolhouse. If it ain't Jesse Lane, the righteous cowboy who thinks he's too good for honest work. Morrison. Jessie stepped protectively in front of Miss Carter. What do you want? I want you back, Lane. Turns out you were right about some things and wrong about others. I need men I can trust, and despite our differences, you're one of them. Jessie shook his head. I'm not interested. I've got a life here now. Morrison's eyes flicked to Miss Carter, and his expression turned ugly. Playing house with the schoolmarm, are you? That's real sweet, Lane, but it ain't gonna last. Men like you don't settle down to teaching children. You get restless, you get bored, and you leave. Better to come with me now and save everyone the heartache later. Get out, Jessie said quietly. You're not welcome here. Morrison smiled coldly and pulled out a folded paper. Here's a warrant for your arrest, Lane. Seems you left some unfinished business back at the ranch. Some missing cattle that went missing right around the time you decided to get all righteous about workers' rights. Jessie felt the blood drain from his face. You know that's a lie. You know I never stole anything. What I know is that you're coming with me one way or another. Either you come willingly and we work something out, or I drag you back in chains and let the law sort it out. Miss Carter stepped forward, her face pale but determined. You can't just... Ma'am, I'd advise you to stay out of this. This is between me and the thief here. Jessie looked at the warrant, recognizing the official seal, even as his mind raced with the implications. Morrison had the power to destroy everything he'd built, everything he'd found. But more than that, he had the power to destroy Miss Carter's reputation and the school's standing in the community. The man Jesse had become in Kansas, the man who'd made peace with his past and planned a future with the woman he loved, would have to find a way to face this new challenge. But as he looked at Miss Carter's frightened face and Morrison's triumphant smile, Jesse realized that some battles couldn't be won with righteousness alone. Sometimes a man had to be willing to sacrifice everything he'd gained to protect what mattered most. Jesse stared at the warrant in Morrison's hand, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. The charges were false, he knew it. Morrison knew it, but proving it would be another matter entirely. Meanwhile, Miss Carter stood beside him, her face pale but resolute, and Jesse could see the wheels turning in her sharp mind. "Mr. Morrison," Miss Carter said in her schoolteacher voice, crisp and authoritative, "I believe you should know that making false accusations against a citizen is a serious offense. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your position." Morrison laughed harshly. "Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. Lane here is a thief and a troublemaker, and I got the documentation to prove it." "Do you indeed?" Miss Carter moved to her desk and opened the top drawer, pulling out a folded paper of her own. "Because I have documentation as well. Documentation that might interest you greatly." Jesse watched in confusion as Miss Carter unfolded what appeared to be an old photograph. Morrison's confident expression flickered for just a moment before returning to its previous smugness. "I don't know what game you're playing, schoolma'am, but—" "This isn't a game, Mr. Morrison. This is a photograph of my father's congregation, taken 15 years ago during a revival meeting in Millbrook Township, Kansas." Miss Carter's voice was steady, but Jesse could hear an underlying tremor of emotion. "Perhaps you recognize some of the faces." Morrison stepped closer to look at the photograph, and Jesse saw his face go white. "Where did you get this?" "From my father's belongings. He kept meticulous records of everyone he ministered to, including a young cowhand named Buck Morrison, who confessed to stealing cattle from his employer and begged for absolution." Miss Carter's eyes were steel. "My father, being a man of God, granted you forgiveness and helped you disappear before the law could catch up with you. I believe the statute of limitations hasn't run out on cattle theft, has it?" Jesse stared at Miss Carter in amazement. She'd never mentioned, knowing Morrison, never given any indication that she had information that could destroy the man who was threatening them. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, but Jesse was faster, stepping between him and Miss Carter. "I wouldn't, Morrison. There are children in this valley who look up to Miss Carter. Hurt her, and every man within 50 miles will come hunting for you." "You planned this," Morrison snarled at Miss Carter. "You knew who I was when I walked in here." "I recognized your name when Jesse first told me about his troubles at the ranch. I've spent the last month since he left for Kansas trying to decide what to do with the information." Miss Carter folded the photograph carefully and returned it to her desk. "I had hoped never to use it, but you forced my hand." Jesse felt a mixture of admiration and confusion. "Lillian, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I hoped it would never be necessary, and because—" She hesitated, then looked directly at Jesse. "Because I knew that someday you might ask me about secrets, and I wanted to be able to tell you honestly that I'd never kept anything from you that mattered to our future together." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Real touching, but this doesn't change anything. I still got a warrant, and Lane's still coming with me." "Actually," Miss Carter said calmly, "I think you'll find that warrant is worthless." "What are you talking about?" Miss Carter opened another drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "While Jesse was in Kansas, I took the liberty of writing to the sheriff in Morrison County, asking about any outstanding charges against Jesse Lane. I received a response last week." She handed Jesse the letter. "It seems there are no charges pending against you, Jesse. The missing cattle were found 3 days after you left. They'd broken through a fence and wandered into a neighboring canyon. Mr. Morrison's warrant is either a forgery or based on charges that were dropped." Jesse read the letter quickly, his heart racing. "The sheriff says Morrison himself reported finding the cattle and that no charges were ever filed against me." Morrison's face contorted with rage. "You meddling!" "I'm a schoolteacher, Mr. Morrison. Research is what I do." Miss Carter's voice remained calm, but Jessie could see the fire in her eyes. The question now is what we do with the information we have about your past. I'm inclined to let sleeping dogs lie, provided you leave Jessie alone and never set foot in this valley again. Morrison looked from Jessie to Miss Carter, his mind clearly working through his options. The warrant was useless, his threat neutralized, and Miss Carter held enough information to see him hanged for his past crimes. "This ain't over," he finally said. "Yes, it is," Jessie said firmly. "It's been over since the day I walked away from your ranch. I just didn't know it yet." Morrison stormed toward the door, then turned back with a vicious smile. "You think you got it all figured out, don't you, Lane? Think you found yourself a perfect life with your perfect woman? Well, let me tell you something, she ain't as perfect as you think. Ask her about her first teaching job, about why she really ended up in this godforsaken valley. Ask her about the man she was supposed to marry and why he disappeared." With that parting shot, Morrison slammed the door behind him, leaving Jessie and Miss Carter alone in the sudden silence. Jessie turned to look at Miss Carter, seeing the pain that had flashed across her face at Morrison's words. "Lillian?" "Sit down, Jessie. There are things I need to tell you, things I should have told you long ago." Miss Carter moved to the window, watching Morrison ride away before turning back to face him. "Morrison was right about one thing. I do have secrets. Secrets that brought me to this valley. Secrets that might change how you feel about me." Jessie remained standing. "I don't care what they are. You should care. You should know the whole truth about the woman you want to marry." Miss Carter sat down heavily in her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 52 years. "My first teaching position was in Denver. I was 28, old to be unmarried, but determined to make my own way in the world. I fell in love with a man named Charles Whitmorea Banker, respectable, everything my parents wanted for me." Jessie sat down across from her, sensing that whatever she was about to tell him would be difficult. "Charles and I were engaged to be married. The wedding was planned, the invitation sent. But 2 weeks before the ceremony, I discovered something that changed everything." Miss Carter's voice grew quiet, distant. "Charles had been embezzling money from the bank, using his position to steal from depositors' accounts. But that wasn't the worst of it." Jessie waited, sensing there was more. "When I confronted him about it, he didn't deny it. He told me he'd been planning to take the money and disappear after our wedding, leaving me to face the consequences. He'd already arranged for some of the stolen funds to be traced back to accounts that bore my name, accounts he'd opened, without my knowledge, using my signature." Jessie felt a cold anger building in his chest. "He was going to frame you for his crimes." "Exactly. I would have been the perfect scapegoat, the banker's wife, who had access to everything, who could have easily manipulated the books. By the time anyone discovered his theft, he'd be long gone, and I'd be facing prison." "What did you do?" Miss Carter reached into her desk and pulled out the silver locket Jessie had seen her touch so often. "I went to the authorities myself, told them everything I knew about Charles's activities, provided evidence of his forgery of my signature. But Charles was smart, covered his tracks well. When they went to arrest him, he'd already disappeared." "And you?" "I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the scandal ruined me in Denver society. No respectable family would hire a governess who'd been associated with such a thing, and no man would court a woman whose name had been linked to theft and deception." Miss Carter opened the locket, revealing a small photograph of herself as a much younger woman. "I left Denver and came here, to the middle of nowhere, where no one knew my story." Jessie studied her face, seeing the pain she'd carried for so many years. "That's why you understood what I was going through. You'd been falsely accused, too." "Not falsely accused, I was never charged with anything, but guilty by association in the eyes of society. I knew what it felt like to have your reputation destroyed by someone else's lies." Miss Carter closed the locket with a soft click. "I've spent 24 years in this valley, Jessie, building a new life and trying to forget the old one. When you showed up at my door, beaten down and blamed for something you didn't do, I saw myself in you." Jessie reached across and took her hands in his. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid that if you knew the truth about my past, you'd see me differently." Afraid that you'd think I was damaged goods, too old and too complicated for a good man like you." Jessie stood and pulled her to her feet, looking directly into her eyes. "Lillian Carter, you are the strongest, wisest, most courageous woman I've ever known. What happened to you in Denver doesn't define you any more than what happened to me in Kansas defined me. We're both here now, together, and that's what matters." "But Jessie, there's more. Morrison was right about one thing. Charles Whitmore didn't just disappear. 3 years ago, I received word that he'd been found dead in California, shot by someone he'd tried to swindle. The authorities contacted me because I was listed as his next of kin in some old documents." Jessie felt the pieces clicking together. "That's how you knew Morrison would try to use false charges against me. You'd seen how men like him operate. Charles's death cleared my name completely. They found evidence of all his crimes, including the forged documents that would have implicated me. But by then, I'd already made my life here. This valley, this school, these children, they became my whole world." Jessie pulled her closer. "And now I'm terrified that Morrison's words will make you doubt me, doubt us. I'm terrified that knowing about Charles and my past will change how you feel about building a future together." Jessie cupped her face in his hands. "Lillian, listen to me. Your past doesn't scare me, it makes me love you more. You survived betrayal and scandal and built something beautiful from the ashes. You took broken people like me and helped them heal. You are exactly the woman I want to spend my life with." Miss Carter's eyes filled with tears. "Are you certain? Because once we marry, my past becomes your past. There may always be whispers, always be people who remember the scandal. Let them whisper. I know who you are, and that's all that matters to me." Jessie smiled. "Besides, I'm pretty sure I can handle a few gossips after facing down Buck Morrison." Miss Carter laughed through her tears. "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher." Jessie pulled her into his arms. "We're both done running from our pasts, Lillian. It's time to start building our future." As they held each other in the fading afternoon light, Jessie realized that Morrison's attempt to destroy them had actually brought them closer together. All the secrets were out now, all the cards on the table. They knew the worst about each other and chose love anyway. Outside, the sound of children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze as the older students finished their chores and headed home. Soon, this schoolhouse would be filled with the sounds of their own family students who looked to them for guidance, and perhaps someday children of their own. Jessie looked at the woman in his arms and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The broken cowboy and the scandal-touched schoolteacher had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal and grow and love. The truth, as it turned out, had indeed set them free. 3 weeks after Morrison's departure, Jessie stood in the schoolhouse at dawn, watching Miss Carter prepare for what would be the most important day in their shared life. Today, they would be married in a simple ceremony before the children and townspeople who had become their family. But first, Jessie had one final task, to complete a task that would require all the courage he'd learned over the past months. The letter had arrived the previous evening, delivered by the same circuit rider who'd brought news of his father's illness months before. But this letter bore the official seal of the territorial court, and its contents had shaken Jessie to his core. "You're up early," Miss Carter said, emerging from the small room where she'd been preparing her wedding dress, a simple blue gown that had belonged to her mother. "Couldn't sleep." Jessie folded the letter and slipped it into his vest pocket. "Lillian, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her stop arranging flowers at her desk. "What's wrong?" Jessie pulled out the letter, his hands steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "This came yesterday. It's from the territorial judge in Colorado Springs. Buck Morrison has filed formal charges against me for cattle theft, claiming he has new evidence." Miss Carter's face went pale. "But we proved those charges were false. The sheriff's letter. Morrison's claiming that letter was forged, that he never found the missing cattle. He's produced witnesses who swear they saw me driving stolen livestock across the county line." Jessie's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with controlled anger. He's also claiming that you and I conspired to fabricate evidence against him to cover up my crimes. That's preposterous. Maybe so, but it's enough for the judge to issue a warrant for both our arrests. We're to appear in court within 10 days or face federal marshals coming to arrest us. Miss Carter sank into her chair, the weight of the implications hitting her. If we're arrested, the school will close. The children... I know. Jessie knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. That's why I've made a decision. I'm going to Colorado Springs alone. I'll face whatever charges Morrison's trumped up, and I'll keep you out of it entirely. Absolutely not. Miss Carter's voice was firm. We face this together, Jessie. We're partners now, remember? Not yet, we're not. We're not married yet, which means you can still walk away from this mess with your reputation intact. Miss Carter stood abruptly, her eyes flashing with anger. Jessie Lane, if you think I'm going to abandon you now, after everything we've been through together, then you don't know me at all. I know you well enough to know that you've spent 24 years building a life here, earning the trust and respect of this community. I won't let Morrison destroy that because of me. And I won't let you face false charges alone, not when I have evidence that could help prove your innocence. Jessie stood and began pacing the small room. What evidence? Morrison's destroyed the sheriff's letter by claiming it was forged. Your father's photograph proves Morrison's a thief, but it doesn't prove I'm not one too. There's something else. Miss Carter moved to her desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a small wooden box. Something I haven't told you about. Jessie stopped pacing. More secrets? Not secrets. Insurance. Miss Carter opened the box to reveal a collection of letters tied with ribbon. Correspondence from my father's mission work, including letters from people Morrison wronged during his time in Kansas. Jessie moved closer as she untied the ribbon and spread the letters across her desk. What do they say? One of them is from the rancher Morrison stole from 15 years ago. My father helped the man track down Morrison's trail after he disappeared, and they discovered he'd been working with a gang of cattle thieves operating across 3 territories. Miss Carter picked up one letter in particular. This describes Morrison's method show. He would accuse honest workers of theft to cover his own crimes, how he would forge documents and produce false witnesses. Jessie read over her shoulder, his excitement growing. This is exactly what he's doing to me. The pattern is identical. More importantly, this rancher is still alive and living in Wyoming. He'd testify about Morrison's character and methods if we could get him to court. Jessie felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by reality. That's a big if, Lillian. Wyoming's a long way from Colorado Springs, and we don't have time to contact him and arrange for his testimony. Actually, we do. Miss Carter smiled for the first time since he'd shown her the letter. I wrote to him 2 months ago, right after Morrison's first visit. He's been expecting to hear from us. Jessie stared at her in amazement. You've been planning for this possibility all along. I've been preparing for it. There's a difference. I hoped it would never be necessary, but I wanted to be ready if Morrison tried to cause more trouble. Jessie pulled her into his arms, marveling once again at her wisdom and foresight. What did I ever do to deserve you? You believed in the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it cost you everything. That's worth more than you know. They spent the morning going through Miss Carter's correspondence, building a case that would expose Morrison's pattern of false accusations and theft. The evidence was compelling, but Jessie couldn't shake the feeling that Morrison had one more card to play. His concerns proved justified when Tom Brennan arrived at midday with urgent news from town. Jessie, Miss Carter, the old mailman said, dismounting quickly from his horse. You need to know there's a federal marshal in town asking questions about you both. Morrison's with him, and they're planning to arrest you before the wedding ceremony. Jessie felt his blood run cold. How much time do we have? Maybe an hour, maybe less. They're gathering statements from townspeople, trying to build a case that you've been hiding out here, planning more thefts. Miss Carter straightened her shoulders, and Jessie recognized the look of determination that had first drawn him to her. Then we go to them. We don't run. We don't hide. We present our evidence and trust in the truth. Lillian, if they arrest us, then we'll face it together. but I won't spend my wedding day cowering in fear of false accusations. She moved to her desk and began gathering the letters and documents they'd organized. Besides, we have something Morrison doesn't expect the support of this community. As if summoned by her words, the schoolhouse door opened to admit a stream of townspeople. Parents of Miss Carter's students, neighbors who'd watched Jesse's transformation, children who looked up to both of them as family. They came quietly but determinedly, filling the small space with their presence. "Miss Carter," said Mrs. Patterson, Emma's mother, "we heard about the trouble. We want you to know that we stand with you and Jesse." "All of us," added Bill Henderson from the general store. "We've seen the kind of people you are, the good you've done for our children. Whatever lies this Morrison fellow is telling, we know better." Jesse felt emotion tighten his throat as more people voiced their support. These were folks who'd watched him earn his place in their community through honest work and genuine care for their children. Their faith in him was a gift he'd never expected and would never take for granted. "Thank you," Miss Carter said, her voice thick with gratitude. "But we can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," interrupted Jake Morrison, Tom's son, and one of Jesse's former students. "We're offering. This is our community, our school, our teacher. We protect what's ours." The sound of approaching horses cut through the murmur of conversation. Through the window, Jesse could see two riders approaching a stern-faced man in a federal marshal's badge, and Buck Morrison, both armed and looking grimly determined. "This is it," Jesse said quietly to Miss Carter. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "It's not over yet," Miss Carter replied, squeezing his hand. "We still have cards to play." The marshal and Morrison dismounted and approached the schoolhouse, but as they drew near, they found their way blocked by a solid wall of townspeople. Men, women, and children stood shoulder to shoulder, not threatening but unmovable. "Federal Marshal," called out Bill Henderson, "you're welcome in our town, but we'd like to know your business with our schoolteacher and her intended." Jesse watched through the window as the marshal surveyed the crowd. Clearly not expecting such unified resistance, Morrison whispered something in his ear, but the lawman shook his head and stepped forward. "I'm Marshal Wade Collins," he announced. "I have warrants for the arrest of Jesse Lane and Lillian Carter on charges of cattle theft and conspiracy." "Then you'll have to go through us to serve them," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "These are good people who've done nothing but serve our community." Jesse squeezed Miss Carter's hand and stepped toward the door. "It's time to face this head-on." "Together," she agreed, gathering up their evidence. As they prepared to walk out and meet their accusers, Jesse felt a calm settle over him. Whatever Morrison had planned, whatever lies he'd constructed, they would face it with truth and courage and the support of people who knew their character. The broken cowboy who'd arrived at this schoolhouse months ago was gone, replaced by a man ready to fight for his future, his love, and his community. The real test was about to begin. Jesse and Miss Carter stepped out of the schoolhouse together, their evidence bundled carefully in Miss Carter's arms. The crowd of townspeople parted to let them through, but remained close, a living wall of support that spoke louder than any words could have. Marshal Collins was a weathered man in his 50s, with the careful eyes of someone who'd learned to distinguish truth from lies through long experience. He studied Jesse and Miss Carter as they approached, his gaze taking in their calm dignity and the obvious respect the community showed them. "Jesse Lane?" the marshal asked. "I am." Jesse stepped forward, removing his hat. "And this is Miss Lillian Carter. I have warrants for both your arrests." Collins pulled the documents from his vest. "Charges of cattle theft and conspiracy, filed by Mr. Morrison here." "The charges are false, Marshal," Miss Carter said firmly, "and we have evidence to prove it." Morrison spat in the dirt. "They'll say anything to save their necks. Don't listen to them, Collins." "I'll listen to everyone before I make my decision." Collins replied, his voice carrying the authority of his office. "Mr. Morrison, you've presented your case. Now let's hear theirs." Jesse felt a surge of hope. This marshal wasn't Morrison's puppether, was a lawman interested in justice, not revenge. "Marshal Collins," Miss Carter began, Before we address the specific charges against us, I believe you should know about Mr. Morrison's history of making false accusations." She handed him the first letter from her father's collection. "This is correspondence from a rancher in Kansas who was robbed by Mr. Morrison 15 years ago. It details Morrison's pattern of accusing innocent workers of theft to cover his own crimes." Collins read the letter carefully, his expression growing more interested with each line. "This is serious stuff, ma'am, but it's 15 years old." "The pattern isn't," Jesse said. "3 months ago, Morrison tried to force me back to his ranch by threatening to have me arrested for stealing cattle that he knew had been found days after I left. You got proof of that?" Miss Carter handed him the letter from the sheriff. "This is official correspondence stating that no charges were ever filed against Jesse and that the supposedly stolen cattle were found safe on ranch property." Morrison's face was turning red. "That letter's a fake. I told you they'd try to—" "Actually," interrupted a new voice, "that letter is genuine." Everyone turned to see a tall man in a dusty coat dismounting from a horse at the edge of the crowd. Jesse didn't recognize him, but Morrison's face went white. "Who are you?" Collins asked. "Sheriff Tom Bradley, Morrison County, Colorado." The newcomer showed his badge and approached the group. "Got word that Morrison was trying to press charges against Jesse Lane based on supposed evidence from my jurisdiction. Figured I better come set the record straight." Morrison looked like he wanted to run, but Collins stepped closer to him. "Sheriff Bradley, what can you tell us about these charges?" "I can tell you they're complete fabrication. Jesse Lane never stole any cattle from Morrison's ranch. The animals in question wandered off and were found 3 days later, exactly as I stated in my letter to Miss Carter here." Bradley's voice was hard. "What Morrison didn't mention is that I've been investigating him for cattle theft myself." The crowd murmured with interest. Jesse felt Miss Carter take his hand, squeezing tightly. 3 weeks ago," Bradley continued, "I received information from a rancher in Wyoming fellow named Hutchins about Morrison's activities 15 years back. Hutchins has been tracking Morrison ever since he robbed him, and he's got evidence linking Morrison to a string of thefts across 3 territories. Morrison made a move toward his horse, but several townspeople stepped into his path. Collins drew his gun. Nobody's going anywhere until this gets sorted out." The marshal looked at Bradley. "You have documentation of these investigations?" "Right here." Bradley produced a thick folder. Witness statements, evidence of falsified reports, and testimonies from ranch hands, Morrison's accused over the years to cover his own crimes. Jesse Lane's case fits the pattern exactly. Jesse felt the weight of months of worry and fear lifting from his shoulders. "Marshal, there's one more thing you should know." He reached into his vest and pulled out a letter knot, one of Miss Carter's documents, but something he'd written the night before, sealing away in preparation for this moment. "This is my confession," Jesse said, handing it to Collins. "Not to cattle theft, but to falling in love with the finest woman I've ever known and wanting to build a life with her that's based on truth and honesty." Collins looked at the sealed letter, a slight smile playing at his lips. "This your way of proposing, son?" "My way of saying that I'd rather face any charges honestly than live one more day with lies between us." Jesse turned to Miss Carter. "I love you, Lillian. I want to marry you today, right now, in front of everyone who matters to us." Miss Carter's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Jesse, yes." Morrison made one last desperate attempt to flee, but Sheriff Bradley was faster, tackling him to the ground and snapping handcuffs around his wrists. "Buck Morrison," Bradley announced, "you're under arrest for cattle theft, filing false reports, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As Morrison was hauled away, still protesting his innocence, Marshal Collins looked at Jesse and Miss Carter with something approaching amusement. "Well," he said, "this is the strangest arrest I've ever not made. Sheriff Bradley, you satisfied with the evidence?" "More than satisfied. These folks are victims, not criminals." Collins nodded and formally tore up the warrants. "Jesse Lane, Lillian Carter, you're free to go, and congratulations on your engagement." The crowd erupted in cheers, But Jesse only had eyes for Miss Carter, the woman who'd stood by him through every challenge and who would now become his wife. The impromptu wedding that followed was unlike anything Tumbleweed Junction had ever seen. Word spread quickly through the valley that not only had Jesse and Miss Carter been cleared of all charges, but they were getting married immediately. Families who had planned to attend the evening ceremony rushed to prepare, bringing flowers, food, and musical instruments for an unexpected celebration. Mrs. Patterson and the other women whisked Miss Carter away to help her prepare, while the men worked with Jesse to transform the schoolhouse into a wedding chapel. Desks were moved aside to create an aisle, wildflowers were gathered from the surrounding hills, and someone produced a worn but beautiful lace tablecloth to serve as an altar covering. "Never thought I'd see the day when a schoolmom's wedding would be the most exciting thing to happen in this valley," chuckled Bill Henderson as he helped arrange benches for seating. "She's not just any schoolmom," Jesse replied, straightening his vest and trying to calm his racing heart. "She's the woman who saved my life." Sheriff Bradley approached, having finished the paperwork for Morrison's arrest. "Son, I wanted to thank you for your patience in all this. Morrison's been a thorn in law enforcement's side for years. Your willingness to stand up to him finally gave us the evidence we needed to put him away. I just did what was right. Miss Carter taught me that sometimes standing up for yourself is the same as standing up for everyone else. Wise woman, you're lucky to have found her." Jesse smiled. "I'm lucky she found me." 20 minutes later, Miss Carter emerged from the small room behind the kitchen, and Jesse's breath caught in his throat. She wore her mother's blue dress, simple but elegant, with her hair arranged in a style that made her look both timeless and radiant. In her hands, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers picked by the children, and around her neck hung the locket Jesse had given, Harry's grandmother's locket, which his mother had pressed into his hands before he left Kansas. The ceremony was performed by Circuit Preacher Williams, who'd been making his monthly rounds and had arrived just as the celebration was beginning. He stood before the assembled crowd, his weathered face beaming with joy at the unexpected blessing of joining two souls who'd found each other against all odds. "Dearly beloved," Preacher Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the packed schoolhouse, "we are gathered here today to witness something beautiful. The union of two people who've learned that love isn't just about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for." Jesse looked into Miss Carter's eyes and saw his future reflected there, a future filled with purpose, partnership, and the daily miracle of building something meaningful together. "Jesse Lane," the preacher continued, "do you take Lillian Carter to be your wife, to love and cherish, in good times and in bad, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jesse said, his voice clear and strong. "I promise to love her, support her dreams, and stand by her side no matter what challenges we face." "Lillian Carter, do you take Jesse Lane to be your husband, to love and cherish, in good times and in bad, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Miss Carter replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I promise to believe in him always, to build a life together based on truth and love and service to others." Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, his grandfather's wedding ring, which his mother had also given him. With hands that trembled only slightly, he slipped it onto Miss Carter's finger. "With this ring," he said, "I give you my heart, my name, and my promise that we'll face whatever comes together." Miss Carter had no ring to give him, but she took his hands in hers and spoke words that would stay with him forever. "Jesse, you came to me broken and lost, and you've become the strongest, kindest man I've ever known. I give you my heart, my faith, and my promise that we'll build something beautiful together. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Preacher Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jesse, you may kiss your bride." Jesse cupped Miss Carter's face, his wife's face in his hands, and kissed her softly, tenderly, as the schoolhouse erupted in cheers and applause. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "Mrs. Lane," Jesse whispered, testing out the name. "Mrs. Lane," she repeated, smiling through her tears. I liked the sound of that. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, food shared by the entire community, and stories told about the couple's courtship and the dramatic events of the day. Children ran between the adults, excited by the party atmosphere, while their parents shared quiet smiles about the love story they'd all witnessed unfold. As the sun set over the valley, Jesse and his new wife stood on the schoolhouse steps, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate around them. The broken cowboy and the lonely schoolteacher had found in each other not just love, but purpose and belonging. So what happens now? Jesse asked, wrapping his arms around his wife. Now, Lillian said, leaning back against his chest, we build the life we've been dreaming of. Together. In the distance, Sheriff Bradley could be seen escorting Morrison toward the county jail, but Jesse barely spared them a glance. His focus was entirely on the future, on the woman in his arms, the community that had embraced them, and the children who would fill this schoolhouse with laughter and learning. The past, with all its pain and deception, was finally behind them. The future, bright with possibility, stretched out ahead. The impromptu wedding that followed was unlike anything Tumbleweed Junction had ever seen. Word spread quickly through the valley that not only had Jesse and Miss Carter been cleared of all charges, but they were getting married immediately. Families who had planned to attend the evening ceremony rushed to prepare, bringing flowers, food, and musical instruments for an unexpected celebration. Mrs. Patterson and the other women whisked Miss Carter away to help her prepare, while the men worked with Jesse to transform the schoolhouse into a wedding chapel. Desks were moved aside to create an aisle. Wildflowers were gathered from the surrounding hills, and someone produced a worn but beautiful lace tablecloth to serve as an altar covering. Never thought I'd see the day when a schoolmom's wedding would be the most exciting thing to happen in this valley, chuckled Bill Henderson as he helped arrange benches for seating. She's not just any schoolmom, Jesse replied, straightening his vest and trying to calm his racing heart. She's the woman who saved my life. Sheriff Bradley approached, having finished the paperwork for Morrison's arrest. Son, I wanted to thank you for your patience in all this. Morrison's been a thorn in law enforcement's side for years. Your willingness to stand up to him finally gave us the evidence we needed to put him away. I just did what was right. Miss Carter taught me that sometimes standing up for yourself is the same as standing up for everyone else. Wise woman, you're lucky to have found her. Jesse smiled. I'm lucky she found me. 20 minutes later, Miss Carter emerged from the small room behind the kitchen, and Jesse's breath caught in his throat. She wore her mother's blue dress, simple but elegant, with her hair arranged in a style that made her look both timeless and radiant. In her hands, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers picked by the children, and around her neck hung the locket Jesse had given her, his grandmother's locket, which his mother had pressed into his hands before he left Kansas. The ceremony was performed by Circuit Preacher Williams, who'd been making his monthly rounds and had arrived just as the celebration was beginning. He stood before the assembled crowd, his weathered face beaming with joy at the unexpected blessing of joining two souls who'd found each other against all odds. Dearly beloved, Preacher Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the packed schoolhouse, we are gathered here today to witness something beautiful. The union of two people who've learned that love isn't just about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for. Jesse looked into Miss Carter's eyes and saw his future reflected there, a future filled with purpose, partnership, and the daily miracle of building something meaningful together. Jesse Lane, the preacher continued, do you take Lillian Carter to be your wife, to love and cherish, in good times and in bad, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? I do, Jesse said, his voice clear and strong. I promise to love her, support her dreams, and stand by her side, no matter what challenges we face. Lillian Carter, do you take Jesse Lane to be your husband, to love and cherish, in good times and in bad, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? I do, Miss Carter replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. I promise to believe in him always, to build a life together based on truth and love and service to others." Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, his grandfather's wedding ring, which his mother had also given him. With hands that trembled only slightly, he slipped it onto Miss Carter's finger. "With this ring," he said, "I give you my heart, my name, and my promise that we'll face whatever comes together." Miss Carter had no ring to give him, but she took his hands in hers and spoke words that would stay with him forever. "Jesse, you came to me broken and lost, and you've become the strongest, kindest man I've ever known. I give you my heart, my faith, and my promise that we'll build something beautiful together. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Preacher Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jesse, you may kiss your bride." Jesse cupped Miss Carter's face, his wife's face, in his hands and kissed her softly, tenderly, as the schoolhouse erupted in cheers and applause. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "Mrs. Lane," Jesse whispered, testing out the name. "Mrs. Lane," she repeated, smiling through her tears. "I like the sound of that." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, food shared by the entire community, and stories told about the couple's courtship and the dramatic events of the day. Children ran between the adults, excited by the party atmosphere, while their parents shared quiet smiles about the love story they'd all witnessed unfold. As the sun set over the valley, Jesse and his new wife stood on the schoolhouse steps, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate around them. The broken cowboy and the lonely schoolteacher had found in each other not just love, but purpose and belonging. "So what happens now?" Jesse asked, wrapping his arms around his wife. "Now," Lillian said, leaning back against his chest, "we build the life we've been dreaming of, together." In the distance, Sheriff Bradley could be seen escorting Morrison toward the county jail, but Jesse barely spared them a glance. His focus was entirely on the future, on the woman in his arms, the community that had embraced them, and the children who would fill this schoolhouse with laughter and learning. The past, with all its pain and deception, was finally behind them. The future, bright with possibility, stretched out ahead.